Hey guys, it's Mrs. Hoekstra. We are finally in Module 4, Lesson 1. I'm on page 2, and we're talking about percents in this unit. And so we're going to start off with talking about different ways that we can represent percents. All right, you'll see this opening exercise. This lesson should be pretty short, so hopefully it's a lot of review for you guys. And here we go. I want you guys to take a look at this first thing. We're going to match. So kind of go back to when you were in elementary school where you just drew lines to the things that matched each other up. All right, and I want you to match the percent that's there on the left-hand side with the written descriptions over there on the right-hand side. All right, everyone gets used exactly once. So I'm going to hit pause, and I want you guys to go ahead and work on this one on your own. See how you do. Okay, this should be review, so give it a try. Okay, so there are my answers. All right, and I use different colors so you can kind of keep track of where they belong and what they went to. Check your answers with mine. If you have any questions, come back to class and ask me how I figured out what I've got there. All right, I'm going to go then to page 3. We're flying. Whew. All right, so on page 3, I want you guys to take a look at what we've got going on here. It says to color the grids to represent the following fractions. So before we get into that, I want you to understand that's a 10 by 10 grid, right? It's a 10 by 10 grid, 10 by 10, which means 10 times 10, so this is hundreds, right? There is 100 squares in those. So that should make this part of it pretty easy. I would like you guys to, again, hit pause. If you are working in pen and you make a mistake on here, it's going to be really tough. So I suggest you work in pencil, at least until you see what the actual answer is after you're done hitting the pause. But give this a shot. See if you can figure out how many of each of those grids you need to color. Okay, so there are my drawings for this particular problem. So the first one, I colored 3 bars or 3 tens or 30, right? The second one, there's only 3 out of 100 that should be colored, so I colored just that. Then the C, part C, that third one's a little harder, right? It's 1/3, so I have to color 1/3 of one square, right? Because there's 100 squares, I'm only coloring 1/3 of it. All right, so obviously you can tell we're talking about fractions, percentages, all kinds of crazy stuff. So I want to just kind of hit a couple vocab terms before we get too far into it. So let's talk about the word percent. Okay, percent actually means out of 100. Out of 100, right? So when you say, oh, I got a 98% on my test, that means you got 98 out of 100. Okay, that's what that means, that you're putting it into that kind of a term. And you can write percentages in different ways, and that's what this lesson and pretty much this book is going to be dealing with. So let's do one of these examples up here. Let's do the first one, because that one was kind of easy, at least I thought. 30 over 100. In other words, 30 out of 100, right? That's how you could think of it, as 30 out of 100. So you could say it or think it. Well, then if I change that to a percent, that means it becomes 30%, because it's 30 out of 100. Percent just means out of the 100. I don't have to write the out of 100 part, right? This piece here is written that way in shorthand, right? Because again, I'm a lazy person. That's kind of an easy way to do it. Also, another way of writing 30 over 100 or 30%, I could change it to a decimal. So that could be 0.30 because it's in the hundredths place. Okay, I could, of course, take that fraction, 30 over 100. I could reduce it, right? I could write it as 3/10, right? Just drop off the zeros, reduce it. I could have even reduced it a different way. I could have cut it in half even, right? Half of 30 is 15, and half of 100 is 50. All of those are equivalent, right? Well, let's compare that then to the 1/3, because that one's a lot trickier that we had up there. So let's talk about the 1/3 of 100. First of all, it's illegal to have a fraction inside a fraction. Okay, we'll deal with that later. But right now, just so you understand, this means this is 1/3 out of 100. Well, what did I say was an easy way to write out of 100? Out of 100, we could write it as 1/3%, right? Out of 100, we just write it with the percent sign. Okay, well, let's think. How do we write 1/3 as a decimal, right? As a decimal, 1/3 is 0.3 repeating, right? and then keep the percent sign there. Right, so I could just change it because I know you guys claim you like your decimals better, as much as I can't stand them. If I change that to an actual decimal, because right now it's still a percent, right? These have percents with them. If I change it to a decimal, because we can't work with a percentage. We have to change it to a decimal or to a fraction in order to work with it. So if I change this, it becomes 0.003, repeating, because I've got to make it out of 100. And we will discuss all that as we go through this book. All right, let's talk about this example down here then. Let's change these percents over to fractions and then over to decimals. Now remember, I said percent means out of 100. So let's take 37.5% and put it over literally 100. Okay, well, guess what? Decimals inside fractions are also illegal. So in order for me to do that, I've got to multiply both the top and the bottom by 10 so that I get rid of the decimal. 375 over 1,000. Okay, let me show you the Mrs. Hoekstra shortcut to changing these over. Okay, I think I showed you guys this in class, but in case you missed it the other day, I will show you guys again. So I want to put the 5 in the thousandths place, right? 0. I'm going to put my invisible 1 underneath my decimal point, and I'm going to write the digits so I can get the number 1,000, right? I don't really physically have it there, but it's just there to remind me. The 5 needs to go above the 0 of the 1,000th. So I put the 5 there, the 7 there, and the 3 there. So to change it to a decimal, it comes 0.375. All right, let's try 100%. 100% is 100 over 100. But I know 100 divided by 100 equals 1, which as a decimal means it equals 1. Okay, 100%, that means you got everything right. You got the whole test, right? Or you get 100% of a pizza. You get the whole thing. What if I gave you 110%? 110%, I'm going to put 110 over 100 because percent means out of 100. And let's reduce this, right? How many times does 100 go into 110? Goes in there once with 10 100ths left over. Or I could write it as 1 and 1/10. Okay? In fact, if I say it that way, 1 and 1/10, to change it to a decimal, it becomes 1.1 or 1.10 if you want to do it that way. Okay, the 0 can or be there, or it doesn't have to, it's up to you. So let's try 1%. 1% is 1 out of 100, right? Can I reduce it? No. Why did I put an equal sign there then, huh? Doesn't reduce, so we're good with that. How do I write 1/100th? Again, I'm going to use my little shortcut. I'm just going to put my 100 down on the bottom. The digit 1 belongs over the last 0, and I fill it in. So 0.01 as a decimal. All right, now let's do a 1/2%. 1/2% means 1/2 over 100. Illegal, cannot have a fraction inside the fraction. So I'm going to rewrite this as 0.5 over 100. Again, still illegal, cannot have that. But what I could do is move my decimal point over. So that becomes 5 over 1,000. That is totally legal. I could reduce it. If you wanted to reduce that, 5 goes into itself once. 5 goes into 1,000 200 times. Okay? So that is, any of those would be all equivalent to each other, but the last two are the most legal. All right, but I like this 5 over 1,000 because it helps me to be able to write my answer. So I'm going to write the digits for 1,000. 5 goes over the last 0, and I fill in zeros to the front of it. And there it is as a decimal. Okay, so hopefully you guys did all right with those. Let's take a look at the top of page 4. We're almost done. Top of page 4. So we're going to change fractions to decimals to percents just like we did here, but I'm going to give you it in different spots. So let's start with 350%. Again, I like to change the percent to a fraction. All right, so to change the percent to a fraction, I'm going to take 350 and put it over 100. Can I reduce that fraction? Most definitely. And I'm actually not going to turn it into a mixed number yet. All right, I'm going to reduce it by getting rid of the zeros. So then it became 35 over 10. Well, what goes into both 35 and 10? I can divide them both by 5. So 35 divided by 5 is 7, and 10 divided by 5 is 2. Yes, you could write it as 3.50, but that, of course, is what we get over here. Okay? Well, what if I give you the decimal and say, hey, I want you to change it over to a fraction? Okay? So I'm going to put my invisible 1 and zeros underneath here. So my 5 is in the thousandths place. So in other words, I could write 25 over 1,000. Unfortunately, percent means out of 100. So I could move the decimal point over so that the decimal point, which is currently right here, I move it over to that spot. If I do it in one, I got to do it in both. So it really becomes 2.5. Actually, I'm going to put it over here. It becomes 2.5 over 100. Okay, now it's a percent. 2.5 out of 100. Out of 100 means percent. So that means that over here I have something is wrong here. What's wrong? No, I'm fine. I got it right. 2.5%. Right? It's a tiny number. Oh, you only got 2.5%. Wrong. That's a good thing. Okay, so that's how we could set that up. We could also take that fraction if we wanted to write it as the most reduced. What goes into both 25 and 1,000? Let's go back to that. I could divide both of them by 25. 25 goes into 25 once. 25 goes into 1,000 40 times. Okay? All right, last, 1/8. So how do I change 1/8 over to a decimal and then over to a percent? I'm going to change it to a decimal by doing the long division. All right, how many times does 8 go into 1? Well, it doesn't go into 1, but 8 goes into 10 once. And I have 2, I can drop a 0 in. 8 goes into 20 twice. That's 16. And 8 goes into 40 5 times. So this becomes 0.125. Okay? Well, what I could do is I could put the invisible 1. I'm actually only going to fill this in to the 100 spots because that 5 kind of falls off the back, right? Which means this is really 12.5 over 100. Well, what does over 100 mean? It means percent. So this is really 12.5%. Okay? All right. What we're going to do when you guys come back to class is we are going to write a summary. And I know you're like looking at this going, Mrs. Hoekstra, there's more to go in this book, but we're not going to do this next activity. We're going to do a summary here. We're going to talk about, and maybe you guys can write it down, how do I change a percent to a fraction? Then we're going to talk about how do I take a fraction and change it to a percent? How do I take a percent to a decimal? And how do I change a decimal to a percent? Maybe you know the shortcuts, maybe you don't. If you do, go ahead and write them down, put it in pencil in case I have to add anything or you got to change what you have. But that is really it for today's lesson. It's pretty short, and I will see you guys in class later.